morning, beautiful people. Welcome to Tuesday Morning Encouragement with Alex and Lance.
Yep.
We have exciting news to tell you. This podcast or this
Vlogcast,
show, whatever this is,
this
is now on all podcast platforms.
Yeah, so now you get to listen to us.
Right.
If you can't stand looking at us.
If
If
you're driving,
yeah,
or
if
like
you're
me
busy.
as a mom, I'll just like do the dishes and I just have it playing right there and
start and stop it a lot easier.
right, folding clothes, that mountain.
So all of our
laundry.
shows are now podcasts. We have the Encouragement Show, the Culture Show is a podcast.
That's awesome.
And we just started a new show last week.
Yes.
With yours truly. You, not me. It sounds like I was promoting my...
No, so I finally launched Speak a Life project, and it's going to be, it's called Speak a Life Podcast, right?
Yeah.
And then the second episode will come out tomorrow, so go listen to it, and
I'm very excited that you have been plowing and making space.
I've been
doing
crawling.
This. Well, if anyone has watched the evolution, because that's not a bad word.
No.
I hate to say that.
It's evolving. It's
evolving.
Word
Yes, you have advanced so far, and we did the show last week about time, and as time stalled us out, and continuing to stay in it even if it's not looking. You were always coming, I think I'm called to speaking. I'm like, you got to speak. When, how, why? And I remember the very first prayer one you did.
Oh my goodness.
You
that
almost
was horrible.
booted. If it wasn't for the guys like saying, no, you got to stay in it.
I would have
You would have left and walked out.
I literally wanted to just drop the mic.
I think it's because you knew them. You knew you had to come back and see them tomorrow.
Right.
If you were a
behind
special
the scenes,
guest.
we had a whole cry sesh. And
they didn't. You did.
I did.
That would have been a little
I was
weird.
just crying to them, and they're like, it wasn't that bad. I'm like, it was that bad.
But you stayed in it.
Right.
You've learned how to become better. You've learned your storytelling, your notes, and even no notes, Lex. Like you're just
no notes, Lex.
You're becoming who God's designed you to be.
Right. And I just yielded to the process, even though it was painful.
Right. And so it's been stretching.
Painful, hard.
I would say it's stretched you in uncomfortable ways.
That's what I meant.
And
it's
so
been really getting me out of my comfort zone.
As we do this show every week, and we're always here to encourage you. This show, again, is pre-recorded because we had a super long travel night, and we weren't getting in until about 2 a.m, and I didn't think you'd want to see sandbags and a lot of ums. And
I mean, I have concealer to cover. But
you get to do that. I don't get to do that. So this is pre-recorded. Stay in. This show today is about making room for the Lord, not just visiting. And so a lot of times we go to church on Sundays. If you're a good Christian, you go to church midweek. And then if you're a super Christian, you read your Bible, every day.
The remnant is what they say.
Yeah, the remnant. And so really what we're talking about today is when we recognize that there is something godly, when we recognize that God is in it, are we actually making room? Meaning, are we throwing out things that don't belong to God, the things that we don't really need in our lives, and making more space and more room for him? And so you were kind of singing that song.
We make space.
We make room.
Yeah, I love that song.
But sadly, it's a lot of karaoke for some people.
Karaoke.
And they're not meaning it by action. They're meaning it by words. And there's that saying, it's just lip service.
Right.
And so you have a couple of testimonies. Why don't you tease kind of that, what we're talking about?
So what testimonies?
What you were doing when you were, interning, what people were making space.
So around 19 years old, I left home, went to be a part of this ministry that traveled. So it was with an evangelist, and we traveled from city to city, and we would stay a whole week. And we got to stay with people that opened up their homes at the church. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes we'd be nervous because we don't know them. They don't know us. But it was always amazing every time. For most of the time, we would go and they would have a room for us. Some houses were huge and we all got our own room, some more smaller. But the whole point is that they opened up their home and they showed us the love of Christ. Mm-hmm. And they would feed us. Some would feed us in the morning and at night. And some would stay up with us till 3 a.m, just talking to us, pouring into us after we just poured into others. And so for myself, it was so impactful because I had just come from a life of sin and partying and just kind of doing whatever I wanted to. And I've always felt rejected when it came to the church at that time. And so when they would open up their home, it literally blessed me. I'm like, wow, this is what a family unit looks like. And
Mm-hmm.
they're just accepting us as we are. And now, fast forward, I love to do the same. That's how impactful it was. So we open up our
Right.
home and we allow others to come in and we get to pour into them. We get to feed them and host them and just share the love of Christ.
You see them evolve,
Right.
and it's giving back in a unique way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have your tithe, you have your offering, but a lot of times we forget that God's blessed us with vehicles, with an abundance of
Right.
food, or the ability to cook, and
The
then
ability.
and then well, meaning that like, you know, a
I mean, most
bowl of
people can't cook
spaghetti,
nowadays.
but a bowl of spaghetti is so cheap,
Right. You
and
throw
the
some meat up
ability
in
to
there and
feed and then to house them. And we have a wonderful neighbor in our church, and she lives,
who
you
do
know,
the
right,
same. Right.
and she does this at a level that is like with excellence. She knows that these teenagers, college kids have no extra money,
right.
so they don't even have money to for housing, let alone food.
Mm-hmm.
And out of her own energy, time, you know, all that, she not only creates a space for them to stay, she's concerned about their 2 meals.
Well, she cooks stuff from scratch. Like she
Right,
even
she's
goes the
not
extra mile. Like I
right.
just, but she'll like make desserts from scratch and the food from scratch, sauces and things like that. And those kids love it so much that literally is one of the highlights of them coming to visit for conference.
Right,
And they
every
look
6
forward
months
to
they're
it.
that's like
Right.
the and she says a lot of times that's the first time they've ever experienced a home cooked meal,
Mm-hmm.
or the last time they were at the house, that was the last time they had that. And they get to try different foods, you know, different cultures are being meshed together. But it's
People are
beautiful
being prayed
because
for, delivered. Like it's awesome.
in that, creating that space of not only feeding the physical body,
Mm-hmm.
there's a spiritual feeding of showing like this is what life should look like when you get older. This is
Right.
paying into the next generation. This is giving them opportunity for their lives to be, you know, cleansed, grow. So many levels where you see these kids are at, and they're now over the last 2 years, you're seeing them going from just attending church to now they're like being a part of the church to now
Right.
playing a role as ushers and different, you know, spots in the church in one of our campuses. But it's, if someone didn't take time
The time, yeah.
to open up the sacrifice, and get it, we're all tired.
Right.
We all are wondering what's happening in the environment. Will there be money tomorrow to pay this, to pay that?
Mm-hmm.
But someone's has to think longer than just myself, me,
Right.
myself, and I.
Right.
And that's a lonely road. We see a lot of people in this world that they're always worried about themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have a problem cutting. They don't have a problem making sure they're taken care of. And then if there's anything left over, then I'll try to help out.
Right.
But then there's those few people who give it all, and they're like, you know what? God's given me this, so I want to let everybody partake in it. And that's really what today's show is about, is are we making room for the thing that God has blessed us with to share with others? And, you know, we're using the verbiage of house, but a lot of us have abilities. You know, our guy Chad behind, he's super like always Johnny on the spot to like help with his abilities, cut videos. How can I help? He's using the talent that God's blessed him. Joey in the corner, we call him. You know, he's always willing to help cook and bless people and make food that's just not like, oh, we can just buy this, buy that. No, we're going to make everything from scratch.
Right.
And people come to like, man, I'm really blessed. You know, our coffee shop at our church,
Mm-hmm.
we don't just take out the 2-gallon things and boil hot water and throw some Folgers in there. It's like, no, we're going to make handcrafted coffee, and you're teaching teenagers how to like be responsible. And it's like,
Right.
when you see people using the gifts that God gave them, it blesses a lot of people.
Right.
And it's having that mindset.
Exactly. And even if you don't have like a space, or like say you have a house and you have a lot of roommates and you're like, I'm not able to have people come over. I remember tagging along with my mom when I was younger in a car. You can, if you have a car, you can invite someone in that space.
Mm-hmm.
But we would meet up with her friend, and she had roommates, so she would come out with some tea for my mom and for her, and they would literally just pray together and talk in the car.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember being there and loving it too. So it doesn't matter where you are, or say you don't have a car, you can invite someone to Starbucks, or even like your church if your church serves coffee or something. But the whole point is to invite someone else in your space to share Jesus with them.
Well, and I'm glad you said that, because so many people disqualify themselves.
Right.
Oh, I have a small apartment,
Or if you're young, if you're a teenager.
Yeah,
right?
I have just a room. When we were teenagers running the church and we ran the youth group, we would do game night at bookstores.
See,
We would,
That's
because
awesome
they had
idea.
the Starbucks inside the bookstore. We'd
Right.
we would show our way and, buy a magazine and,
Mm-hmm.
and, read it, but then bring 12 other people to play cards. And it's like,
That's fun too.
go to a Starbucks, there's a table there. Everyone can freely, get a drink, and they got a big table, and create an environment where, you can become friendly. Malls have huge food courts.
Right.
You know,
I've
it's
seen. Remember that
thinking-
one mom we saw?
Mhm.
Like she was with her son or her kids, and she just had some cards out, and they were just playing in the food court. And I was like, oh, that's a good idea, and it's free.
Yeah, and it's creating that space that people want to belong. But
Right.
it takes that one person
To
to
initiate.
be creative and initiate and say, you know what, I'm willing to not make this about me, but I want to see others blessed. I want to see others belong. And so in Second
Right.
Kings 4, 8, and 11, it's talking about Elisha. So now there came a day when Elisha went over to Shechem, where there was an appointed and influential woman, and she pursued him to eat a meal.
Persuaded him.
Afterwards, whenever he passed by, he stopped there for a meal. And so I'm going to stop there, but it's like right there, she was doing good things. She was feeding a prophet. She was,
Right.
helping out where she could.
Mm-hmm.
But then as you read on, she told her husband, behold, I sense that this is a holy man of God who frequently passes our way. Please let us make a small, full-walled upper room on top of our housetop and put a bed there for him with a table and a chair and a lampstand.
Aw.
And then whenever he comes to visit, he can turn in there. And one day he came there and turned in the upper room, and he laid down to rest.
Aw,
And so I love the detail in the story is that so many times when it comes to church things, we're like, oh, we'll just give them the leftovers.
Right.
There's
of,
always the
like, the
donation box. And
That's messed
it's
up.
so scary what people are willing to donate. Like I
Right.
have had to sort donation boxes. I have seen used everything.
Ugh.
Used socks.
It's like just throw it away.
Used
like-
boxers. You're like, let's just throw these away and
Right.
let's put a brand new box in. Like some stuff doesn't need to be donated. And so I thought it was very interesting that as the scriptures, playing out and we're reading, it says fully walled in the upper room. I have been in some rooms that were meant for ministry, and they weren't worth giving to a homeless person.
Right.
And
That's
it was
right.
like, you're like, dear Lord, like, has anyone,
Ah.
and yet there's time and place to eat good food, drive cars. It's like, are we not
Right.
putting any energy into the house of God and to the men and women of God that are serving? And especially you see churches, but individually people are like, what's the big deal? They're just pastors, or they're
Right.
used to sleep. I've heard this terminology so many times to an evangelist. Oh, they're used to sleeping in bad hotel rooms.
It's messed up.
And you're like, my goodness, like, so let's just, who really cares about their needs? It's common to them, or they don't really need that good of air conditioning.
We're supposed to do
They're
everything in
traveling,
excellence, right?
yeah, overseas. They don't have some places AC
So
or
they should
heat.
appreciate this.
Well, they'll get by. They're used to that.
Right.
And it's like, no, why would you do that? It's like, go the full extent. She put a table and a chair and a lampstand for light.
Right.
And so it
And
was
back
like,
then, I mean, that sounds.
so she had to go buy furniture. Back then there was no IKEA where
buy,
you
or
were,
they probably made it.
that's what I was going to say.
They made
They
it.
weren't blessed into get the IKEA handbook of 32 hours to put a table together, but they handmade it. So there was more energy than put into that table,
Right.
or money that was not like just easily available. Like they really had to invest in this room. And so I find that, she had to go to her husband. She pleased, like she made a what do you call that? A plea, like, hey, we should really do this. Like, let's stop. Let's not think about buying the extra boat.
Right.
Let's put that vacation on hold, and let's invest in God's kingdom. Like he keeps seeming to come. We don't know. If you read on, Elisha asked, what would you like? And she goes, I'd like a child. Well, a year from now, you'll have a child. She has a child. Child passes. And Elisha says, take that kid up to my room. I'm going to pray over him. He comes back to life. Sometimes we don't know what we're going to need, but by making space for God,
Right.
it leaves room for him because God's already visiting you. You're not visiting him.
Right.
And there's a difference. When we go to church, we're visiting the house of God. And this is really for me is, are you making room for the house of God to come to your house, your dwelling?
That's good.
And so you're a big one on your prayer time in the morning. Like I got to block out this amount of time because it makes your life easier, your day better.
I'm nicer.
You said it, not me. I don't want to be offensive. This is not the culture show. So, as we get into this, share this video, please. Don't forget it is now a podcast. But if we're making sense, please comment below. Have you even made room yet for God to visit your house, or are you visiting the house of God? So comment below. Alexis will be in, even though she will be tired and have kids asking.
Hanging on me.
Yeah, hanging on her. She'll still be able to comment in and comment with you guys and talk. But, I really see this being a theme is, am I visiting the house of God, or have I made space for the house of God in my dwelling?
Right. That's good.
And you have been in the most interesting of housing situations.
Yes.
Rooms with no bathrooms where you would have to go outside.
Oh my goodness.
Leave in all type of weather to
like
find a bathroom.
We're like dodging bullets.
and she says that jokingly, but one of the churches that we reside at had somebody executed about a quarter of a mile. So they were always...
No, one night I had to pee and we heard gunshots.
Right. So
and I was like, what am I supposed to do? Because we're two girls by ourselves and we got to pee and we got to walk to the...
But it sounds like you're telling a story, not reality.
Serious.
So I was just letting everybody know these are real stories.
And then, executed right there. Like literally like within...
About a quarter of a mile.
Yes.
And so, you've had situations that were not pleasant. So I was setting that up is that some people say, you don't understand.
Oh, I understand.
You definitely have that. I understand. You know what it's been like. But I've seen you before we were married, even as friends, then dating. You always made time for God.
Yes.
Like that was a big deal for you.
It was.
And at times I would be like, oh, don't worry. You can pray tomorrow. We have to do this. You're like, no, I haven't. And I'm like, you don't have to be religious about it. But in your heart, it was never religious. It was meaningful to you. That's one thing I would describe your walk with God is it's meaningful.
Right. And my thing with God is I need him like I need my next breath.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I have that time with him, I literally am rejuvenated. I feel refreshed and renewed. And even as a mom, when I get to just spend a few minutes, because I can't block out a specific time right now, but I can't go without that time with him because we just have that relationship.
Right.
And it's grown over the years through the intimacy and me being more vulnerable. But yeah.
But that's you on
that space.
So that's you on a personal level.
Right.
But now on a physical level, having a dwelling.
Right.
We went.
Are you talking about church?
No, in our house.
Oh, in our
I would
home.
say it's been almost 30 months. I've lost so many track of months. But out of, let's say, 28 months, 20 of those months, 23 of those months, we've had somebody living with us.
Yes.
And it was like nobody predicted COVID. Nobody predicted the protest violence. We had friends in Chicago that needed to come back and just get out because they were living it was underneath their apartment. But we have made space, and in moments you're like, oh my goodness, how's this going to work? We're always making food. Dishes always seem to pile up.
Yes.
Food costs never seem to go down. But when you look back, it was some of the most enjoyable moments.
Right. Breaking bread
season.
with our friends, breaking bread, planting seeds, having the time of fellowship. It's been fun. And when people say I'm not really doing ministry because I'm just at home, that's a way of doing ministry.
No, that's a big way of doing ministry.
Yes, pouring into somebody, and not only pouring, but fellowship, meeting a need that they have. But also while you're doing that, the Lord is showing you things as well. You're learning and they're growing and learning as well. And so it's powerful, and it was a great time.
And I love how you preface, well, maybe you don't have the house to do that. Find a way.
Right.
Make some cookies, deliver them.
Right.
Use your car as a place of like, go pick somebody up who doesn't have a ride. I know somebody just did that recently for your grandma.
Yeah.
It literally made
That's all
her,
she
it was like
talks
the
about.
president visited her
Right.
because somebody decided to take her out for probably a $4 treat of ice cream. And it was like, somebody is thinking about me.
Right.
Somebody cares about me that has no need to care for me. And when you see the smile on their face, and it's not to brag, but it's like watching her retell the story, you're kind of excited for them. Like, wow, I'm so thankful that you're experiencing that with a hardship. And it's like, if we could just slow down and make space to do God's work instead of worrying about what God's doing in our lives and how come God, and we did that last week on time, but this week we're like, let's stop, let's slow down, and let's make space for God to move in our own lives for others.
Right. And that's what church is really all about. Like, we go to church, but we are the church.
Right.
We don't just go to church. And so when we take the time to show that to people, they're like, wow, there are still people that really care, like you just said. And that's our whole role as the church, is to show the love of Christ. And so when you make room for him and for others, then you're portraying the love of Christ.
Right.
And so, because I hear people all the time saying, like, the church is this, the church is that. But when you do those things, you break that stereotype down.
Right. And I like that you say, because so many people are saying it, but they're not doing it.
Right.
And, we talk.
Walk the talk.
Yeah. Talk is cheap until actions are put in place.
Right.
And you see so much happening. And I was talking with our pastors. He was doing a identity series. And he said one time he got the whole band up. And this will resonate with you because you're a singer and a musician learning the piano, is that when you have everybody up there and you start taking one person out, he said, well, at what point is it no longer the band? He said, I took out one backup singer, then I took the bass player out. Then I took this, and he did it sporadically, and he goes, okay, and he asked the band, he goes, at what point did you stop being the band? And no one could really say when. It's either, well, you kind of messed it all up when one was missing. And he said, when we stop serving in our local church, you mess up the flow of God, and like the full body's not functioning. And so many times we diminish our role. And it's like, well, they don't need another greeter. Well, how do you not? We're greeting less people now. Well, I only do this. Well, now we're needing more people to take the trash out. And it's like, when we realize our function and we open up our house, when we open up our lives and say, we're going to bless people.
Right.
How much more of God's work is being done through us.
That's good.
And with us. And it's like, we're laying our lives down to see others come to their fruition, their glory, and come into their walk with God. And as that happens, we're seeing God move in our own lives.
That's good. When you were saying that, like, yeah, as a band, you make a sound, but I also saw, like, each local church around the world creates a sound that's released into the atmosphere, into the neighborhood. And so when you don't have the people or the right pieces there, the sound diminishes and gets lower and lower. And I just saw a picture of that.
It's so
like
true.
The sound released from the top of the church going out into the local neighborhood, and then as each piece was being removed, it just less and less.
Well, on that level, we just getting back from Corpus Christi. That's why this show is pre-recorded. We can't minister to Corpus Christi,
right?
Being in West Virginia, being in where your hometown from Rhode Island, you need a church in Corpus Christi. And a lot of times when we're centrally thought, like, we think about ourselves and we start thinking about ourselves down to the point that we forget what a role we play in our local church.
Right.
But it takes all types.
Right.
It takes all types to minister. It needs a recovery church. I grew up in a biker church. Our church doesn't really reach biker church. We reach a lot of men. We have a strong men community. It's like, we need all types to help the voice, to help that sound go out. Right. And create the voice and what God's trying to do. And a lot of times we just kind of downplay, where do I fit in? Well, you don't understand. I don't do it as well as them. And I remember for years I just fought speaking. And I was like, well, I'm a one-on-one person. But I fought what God was trying to do in my life. And I see a lot of people, they could step into their God-designed role today. Right. But they're thinking inside the four walls. And in this story, she made room in her house. She actually had to do an expansion. She did an add-on to her house for God, for God's people, for the man and woman of God doing their work. And a lot of times, what if he only spent 2 times a year there?
Right.
That 2 times a year was very meaningful to him.
Mm-hmm. Like, wow, somebody really opened up their home, gave me a whole entire room.
And Elisha had such a relationship with the Lord. It was basically like, you tell me what you want, God's about to bless you. And so she was rewarded for what she was doing, not looking for that reward. And it's like, yes, when we give, we get. But a lot of times we're so worried about getting, we forget to give first.
Right.
And so,
like, what can I get?
We wanted to really encourage you guys. God is wanting to move in your life. God is wanting to do things for you, but you got to get out of this mode of like, well, I don't have this and I haven't been given this yet, so why would I even dare give up the one thing I already have? And it's when we give up what God's given us, it shows God, I'm willing to give you everything. We love to tell the story of Abraham and Isaac, but we don't really want to live it.
Right.
And that's like, we all think Isaac was like this 9-year-old boy or a 4-year-old.
He was a grown man.
He was 30 years old.
He was like, "Yo, Pops, what you doing?
Yeah.
Where we going?"
Why isn't there anybody else on this journey?
Right.
Like, he wasn't,
he was a grown man. Like,
where
we going?
It wasn't like he was naive to the sacrifice. He's like, well, I guess God's providing.
Right.
And then, you get up there and he's like, lay down. You're like, why? What's going on? It's like you're like, what are you doing, Dad? Like, there's a lot there, but it's like, can we live that lifestyle instead of just talking about it and reading it? And that's what I wanted to encourage people today is step into what God's called you, be who God's called you, and start taking what God's given you and stretch it and make space for him in your life. Not just saying, hey, I attend church. I'm a Christian. Let's not pull in the house of God. Let's be the house of God in our own lives. Let's start doing things in our life, inviting people over, because we never know how hurting people are until we start talking to them, till we start showing them the love of God. And then you're like, oh, you have been through it.
Well, and especially nowadays, like a lot of people just want to shut their feelings down or not talk about it. And so we don't really know until you take that time to do the one-on-one thing and you find out their story.
Oh, and then the compassion goes through the roof. You're like, oh, I didn't know that's how your mom, you didn't have a mom? And you start to recognize. And I think that's when life starts to begin, because we start to understand their story. Our prophet, Kevin Leal said, when we start creating relationships, I share a bit of my story. When you share a bit of my story, that's communion. We're like going back and forth, creating these bonds that we would have never known. But it takes a moment.
Right.
And it takes that breaking of bread.
Well, look at the book of Acts. They talked about that. Like they broke bread every day. And they said people were added on every day. And then they talked about how they would sell everything because they wanted to help those that were in need. Right. And so that's powerful in itself.
And that's how I look at, the book of, everyone's like, I want a move of God. I want to see that book of Acts. And, for us, we have that shirt called Revival Culture. We, culture architects. I see you got to live that whole thing out. You got to see people's lives changed, transformed. I have to be willing to open up my life. If that's what they were doing, this is what I want to do. So if they're willing to feed people, if they were housing people, if they were putting themselves last and putting the body of Christ first, and that's what I want to do to see that move of God. So I want to be stretched. I want to be out there because I want to live every moment for God, doing what I could, what I can, and then see what God can do with that.
Right. And I want to add this, like, when we first started opening up our home, even though I wanted to do it, it wasn't easy. Like, I remember when maybe someone would spill something on the rug or like make a stain or ruin the couch. Right. I remember coming to you and I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I'm like, there's no way I can continue to do this because this is my stuff. It's getting ruined and now we have to replace it. And I remember God saying, like, this isn't your stuff anyways. This is all mine. Oh, wow. So when my perspective changed from that, I was like, this is his anyways. It's replaceable. Then I was like, okay. And that kind of helped me to be able to
and I've even
house anyone at any time.
I've seen people say, this world is not short of comments.
Right.
We've got what's called trolls online.
Right.
You got people there. I've seen people make jabs at you.
Oh my goodness.
Like this, or like, how come you can't get this? Like, you stay at home all the time, yet they're in your house.
Right.
And so that's going to happen.
Or they'll make comments on like, oh, it's not clean right there. And I'm like, excuse me.
Right.
Like,
You're in my house
But
letting me
anyway.
know. Thank you for the Inspector Gadget moment.
Right.
And so we want to encourage you that things will happen like that. People will do things that, are not up to your standards.
Right.
We've seen pink and purple stuff spill all over our carpet. You're like, well, looks like tie-dye carpet's coming in the next season.
Some people would bring bugs in. And that's
Yep.
when I was like, I can't do this. But I asked God, I'm like, well, you wanted me to bring this person in. I did. And so I'm just going to believe that that's not going to be a problem. And sure enough, it wasn't.
Right.
And so he literally will take care of you when you take care of his people.
Yes.
And then what about that scripture that talks about when you host others or when you're serving others, you never know if you're ministering to an angel or
Correct.
ministering to someone that.
Well, and that's so
I mean, I
profound.
don't know exactly where it is, but
Because, we're called the body of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And we just had a huge conference, and there were so many role players. There was
Mm-hmm.
sound men. There was the musicians that were there all the time. There was the hosting people. There was everyone needed to play their role for it to
Right.
come off well. And our pastor kept saying, I just want to thank all the guests, or not the guests, all the helpers, because it's as if you played the most important role. But it's by
Right.
everybody playing their role.
that we can make
And
this happen.
you don't know the role you're playing in someone's life. And it's not to brag, but we have hosted people that we would have never have thought God would have taken them this far in their ministry journey. And
Right.
one of the gentlemen that, no one wanted to host him. We're like, well, we'll host him. We were, we didn't have kids.
Right.
And we're like, we don't know him, but we'll put him up. And now his ministry is booming.
They
They have 280,000 students in there. His
Right.
name is Kevin Zadai. If you haven't got a chance to check him out, wonderful man. But it's like, you don't know who you're ministering to, where God's
Right.
taking them. Alexis doesn't like to talk about it, but I remember when you met Naomi Raines and nobody knew her. Like, she had a table and nobody was coming to it. Today it's a
Right.
different story. But it's like, when you befriend people and you're
Mm-hmm.
there to bless them, I remember you would send her, Starbucks gifts and just, how are you doing, checking in. People like to be welcome. People like to
Right.
feel like they're part of the community. You don't know where God's taking them.
Right.
And a lot of times we either intimidated or we just look like, what's it to, like, they're just normal people, but you're ministering to God's saints, God's workers, and you don't know where it's taking you.
Right.
I look at the story of Vinny, like, he was your kid's, what do you call it? Kids pastor. I wanted to say minister, but he was the kids pastor. And we'd always like, oh, we got to go visit Vinny when we go to. I'm like, I don't know this guy.
Right.
Why do I have to go? Like, oh, you just need to come. And like,
I'm like, because
okay,
you have to.
yeah,
my
you have to.
husband,
You're
you have
married to me. Okay, I'm gonna go. And the relationship grew. And then we had a meeting down there to meet somebody. And I was like, why am I going? Because
Right.
we're going. Okay, we're going. And I didn't know where God was creating this relationship, but now 3 years later, he's part of the team.
Right.
And you're seeing like things move, and his daughter just got married to one of the kids up here in West. It's like seeing God move in such a way,
That you
not
would have never
knowing where it would have
expected.
went. But when
Right.
I first met him, I'm like, I don't understand why I'm getting dragged to this. And it's like, but knowing now, I probably would have talked to him more. Like, hey, I'm going to see you
Right.
in 5 years. Remember, it's like, but it's just funny how we sometimes get caught up in the now moment. Like, oh, I need to watch this movie, or I want to go play video games for 10 more minutes, or lost in social media. And you don't know what that relationship's going to be 2 years, 3 years, 4 years
Well,
down the road.
That's why obedience is so important, because it's like when you obey what God is telling you to do, you don't know what it looks like on the other side, but you're stepping out in faith. And when you step out in faith, he's like, I know what's on the other
Right.
side. Like those relationships, or like those things that he has for you in the future. And so it's like the obedience of one,
Yes.
right? Through the obedience of one, or through the disobedience of one.
Right.
So we have a choice.
Well, so on that note, we're so thankful you guys stayed in with us, watched this, commented. I'm going to have Alexis pray for you. I'm going to kind of throw her a little curveball, but when she says the obedience of one, I've seen her make space. I've seen her make room in her personal life, in our household. But you basically gave up your personal passions. You wanted to be in
Right.
fashion. You also thought, well, what if I start singing?
Right.
And you really chose God and the plan of God. You thought it was going to be a year, when it turned out to be a lifetime.
Right.
But when you said the obedience of one, now you'll never say this publicly, but I'm going to guesstimate you probably prayed for people, 4,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
Like the obedience of one, I always say when you pray for someone, you're praying for someone's mother, a father, a brother, or a sister. It's somebody. And it's like, how many people, if they would have just answered the call, would have been touched?
Right.
And, you guys were part of a traveling ministry. We're blessed to pray with thousands upon thousands of people. But you still had to take the time to say, this is what I want to do with my life.
Right.
I want to sacrifice being this. I want to sacrifice being that for this moment in time to serve God. And now it's turned into a lifetime of ministry minded. Go where you want to go. Send me where you want to send me, God.
Right.
I will go anywhere. I'm not choosing the when and the how. I'm just saying I'm here.
And I wouldn't trade it for anything. I would do it all over again because the blessing that's on the other side of that obedience is just amazing. The peace that I get to walk in with my family, and now the place that he sent us to, like the way that we feel with the family that's surrounding us is like nothing can compare.
Right.
Because of that obedience. And like we were saying, when you step out in that, when God is telling you to do something, you have to have faith because you're like,
sacrifice.
I don't know what's on the other side. And a lot of times we'll say, you show me and then I'll step out. And he's like, no, you step out and then I'll show you.
Right.
And it's literally the best. Like, I want to encourage you out there that if there's something that God is telling you to do that may seem radical or it may seem like
ridiculous,
scary, do it, man, because he knows best. He knows what's on the other side and what you're needing. You don't know. Like, we're just full of feelings and emotions and things. We really don't know what we need and what's on the other side.
So why don't you pray for everybody in that, like, should I or shouldn't I?
Okay.
Coming.
And then what's that song? There's a song about that, like the people that this
Where
person
you
prayed
go, I'll
for.
go. Oh yeah, that's like a 90s song.
Yeah, but it just reminded me of that, like the very person that I don't remember the song.
I
exactly.
always get tear jerked up when I hear "Give Thanks."
Is it that?
Thanks to na, 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 na. Well, there's that one, and there's also like the school teacher. It's like the one that.
What was that song? There's a song, and you guys probably know it better than
comment
I do.
If you know
I
what
just sang
song.
it because I think someone asked me to sing it at a service, and so I did. And I was like learning the words, but I was like, this is powerful. But basically, the person was talking about how when they died and went to heaven, how many people they saw that thanked them for them being there, right? Like, so like a school teacher or the bus driver, you led me to Christ and now I'm here in heaven. Thank you so much.
Well, and we're kind of like all over the place, but it is so powerful because, being a youth pastor and helping out junior hires, they don't know what they're doing. They're just full grown goofballs at that hour. They're like, so, had a young kid. His mom just walked out on him one day, left him and his dad, and was like, I don't know what to do with you, so you're left to your own.
That's so sad.
And he would have so much resentment towards his mom. And I was like, man, just stay in it. And, God does have a plan. And about 7 years later, I'm just driving. I get this phone call, and it's from Las Vegas. I'm like, well, let me see who it is. And it's him. And he's like, man, I just want to thank you for just being there for us.
That's awesome.
And we didn't do anything like super spiritual. We'd take him to play basketball. We would get them involved in the church because we were setting up and just made them feel a part of something for that moment. And that, he was like, that meant everything to me because when my mom walked out, there was a group of people that were in my life. And so it's like, we don't know the stories. And I want to thank every, parent or not parent, but like person that's involved in kids ministry.
Right.
My kids love going to kids ministry. And I think, that is the dreaded role at the church. No one wants to be like stuck in the dungeon, I call it. Like, for those 2 hours, they're not really a part of anything. They're like, I've been with kids all week. Now I'm going to be with more kids.
Right.
But like our littlest, he just leaves me. It's like, deuces. And he like runs into service, checks himself in. And I'm still chasing him down like, hey, here's your tag. But it's like, there's such excitement back there that they love that. Like they still on Thursday are like, are we going to church? I'm like, you just came from church.
Right.
Like they have that hunger, but it's because of the children's workers, the environment that's created by those people that they love it.
Right. And ministry is hard because a lot of times you don't see the fruit.
You'll never see it sometimes.
Right. Like even like I know with us when we used to evangelize and travel city to city, we don't know to this day what happened with those people.
Right.
So when you hear that song, it's encouraging because it's like, you're basically storing up your treasure in heaven
Correct.
by sowing seed and by just living a life of obedience for Christ.
Yes. Well, on that note, why don't you pray for everybody and just give them that just pray out your heart. I'm so glad to see where God has taken you. You
Thank you.
just launched your ministry, Speak Life. Now you got this podcast that also can be watched on video every Wednesday. But it's just staying in it, being faithful, and realizing that I'm going to make room for God. But in that, God's making room for me as I start putting others before me.
Right.
So why don't you pray us out?
Right. So Lord, I just pray for each and every person that's on this podcast and the future people that will listen. I just pray for their hearts and their minds. I pray for their journey as they're running the race. I just pray that you would just help them and give them strength to be faithful, even when times come that are hard, even when they feel like they want to give up on their dream or the very thing that you told them to do. I just pray that you would give them the strength to carry on and to continue, Lord. I also want to just pray for those that have a decision to make. God is telling you something to do and you're nervous because of the trust. I just pray that you will know beyond a shadow of a doubt that what God is telling you to do, that you need to do it. And I just pray for trust. If there was trust that was broken, I just pray that God would restore that trust. I pray that you would step out in faith and not hesitate, because God has something better for you on the other side. And I just pray that you'll be diligent in all that he's calling you to do. In Jesus' name.
Amen. Well, thank you guys for joining us. We will see you live next Tuesday.
Yes. Thank you.